Claire, do you want to introduce yourself?
Welcome everybody on this Monday afternoon. As you may guess, this is not Darren, this is Claire. I'll be hanging out in the chat with you, answering any questions you have there and forwarding them on to Darren so he can answer and demonstrate anything on screen as needed. Hopefully you're all ready to learn how to repair some holes that may have occurred in your knitting or other items you've been gifted. It's a great skill to have. We're going to learn a few different techniques today. If you don't have swatches, that's okay. Just follow along with the class on screen. And if you need to, this is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch it back again. And with all of that out of the way, we'll let Darren finally take over.
All right, welcome to class. This might be a good class to just watch and maybe not try to follow along as much. And then after class, you can watch the recording back and then try to follow along with it. We do cover a lot. I try to go really fast so that we can cover everything. So with all that being said, let's just go ahead and switch to the view of my hands and we'll go ahead and get started.
Darren, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Okay, did you hear any of that before? Or?
Nope, I think you accidentally muted yourself.
Okay, so, all right, so this is a swatch that I made, and then I cut a hole in it. So this is not like a naturally occurring hole in a garment. So the first technique I'm going to show you is just a basic darning, which is filling in this area. So this is it's actually missing fabric. So we can't just bring it together and sew it because it's not gonna be right. We actually have to kind of recreate the fabric that's missing. And usually when you are darning something, it will be like the bottom of a sock, maybe the heel of a sock. And as you're wearing it out over time, you don't just wear a big hole in it. What happens is the fabric all kind of gets threadbare and kind of felted together, and then a hole eventually forms. So when you're darning a sock, it might look different than this. You're not going to have like really nice fabric all around it. Sometimes you'll have threadbare fabric all around the hole. And so you also will have to consider covering any damaged fabric. So if there's damaged fabric around it, then you also want to include that in your darn. So keeping that in mind. Okay. Any questions so far? Doing okay? So I'm going to be working with a large eye blunt needle, and it just has to have a large enough eye to put yarn in, or maybe you're going to be using thread to do your repairs, whatever, you'd want a smaller needle. And I'm using a blunt needle because I'm going between the strands of yarn. I'm not trying to pierce them, but if you're doing this on fabric, then you might need a sharp needle because you can darn and repair store-bought clothing or handmade items. It doesn't have to be just things that you've made. So the first thing I like to do when I'm darning, and you don't always have to do this, if it's a sock that has kind of worn a hole in it and you've got the fabric around it that's kind of felted in place, then it's not going to unravel and it's already pretty stable. But if you've cut a hole in it somehow and it's like this, you might want to stabilize the fabric by quickly, and you could do this with a smaller thread, but I'm using this big red one so that you can see it. You might want to just stabilize the fabric by just kind of whip stitching around it. Or you could use blanket stitch, just anything to kind of keep the fabric from continuing to unravel if the fabric is still unraveling. So sometimes you might want to do this and other times you might not have to, but you really do want to stabilize your fabric. You don't want it to keep unraveling. So I would go, you can go around the entire hole and stabilize it in this way. And I'm not being too super careful about how far apart I'm spacing my stitches because they're all going to be hidden under the darn anyway. Right. Any questions about that, about stabilizing the edges? Okay, I'm just going to do a couple more until I get down here to where I want to start.
We do have a question about this stitching around the edges. Is this going to be permanent, or are you going to remove this at some point?
I would probably leave it, or you can remove it if you feel like your fabric is stable enough to remove it. But I would probably just leave it. And it would probably be a good idea to use a thinner thread to do that so that you're not adding extra bulk to your work. But I'm using this large yarn just to for demonstration so that you guys can see what I'm.
And are you doing a whip stitch or a blanket stitch there?
I'm doing blanket stitch right now, but you could do either. You could do either. Okay, so just for demonstration purposes, just pretend I went all the way around because you guys don't want to waste your life watching me do blanket stitch. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my needle to the front and I'm going to bring it up here because what I want to make sure is I want to be down below any damaged fabric, and I want it to be on the side of any damaged fabric. I don't want to do it like right along the edge of the hole. So I'm just going to bring my yarn to the front, and you want to be careful. You don't want to, you want this hole to stay in the shape that it's in. You don't want it to get pulled in one way or another. And what I'm using is I'm using my needle felting brush. And this is really nice because these bristles help to keep the fabric from sliding. So if you have something like this, you could use that. If you're darning a sock, which is traditionally what people use for darning, is they usually darn a sock. For socks or gloves, you can use a darning egg, or sometimes they're shaped like a mushroom. But if you have a sweater with a large hole in it, then you would want to lay it out flat and do it. So I'm going to take my yarn up the side, and what I'm doing is I'm creating basically a woven fabric to cover the hole. So right now I'm creating the warp. And if I was actually repairing something, I would probably make them a lot closer together. I'm going to be going through these really fast, so they're not going to look great because I'm going to try to cover 4 different techniques in an hour. And usually each one of these might take an hour just on their own. So I'm just going to kind of push through them as fast as I can. You want to try to make sure any raggedy edges are going to be underneath. Like you wouldn't want to bring it up so that the raggedy edges are going to be on top, because we're trying, or you might want to if you're doing more visible mending. Sometimes that's fun, but just make sure you realize what you're getting. Okay. And then bring that up. And this is a good technique for people that if you don't know how to knit, or if you don't want to knit for whatever reason, then you can use this. This is a weaving technique. So I'm going to take that to the back. Now, in an ideal world, I would have had enough to go all the way across. So I'm going to join another strand of yarn. And you would weave these ends in on the back side of your work just the way you would weave in any other end. So I'm just going to tuck them to the back for now. And if this were a real darn, I would finish that after. Weave the ends in after you're sure that your mend is something you want to keep, because once you weave the ends in, it'll be hard to remove it if you want to try it again. And I'm going to go a little past the hole. join it here. Ideally, you would do this you could do this all with one strand of yarn, like you wouldn't necessarily need to change strands of yarn. So, and if I were really mending something I wanted to keep, I would make sure all of these lines down here were perfectly straight. You'd really want to take time to fuss over it. So after you get your warp, then you're going to do your weft, which means I'm just going under and over and under and over. So I'm going to go under, over, under, over, under, over. And this is a basic tabby weave. It's just the most basic weave. And then you're going to pull that across. And you don't want to pull it tight. You want to pull it so that this is not going to be pulling over. And then attach it to the side of your item. And when you weave back across, you want to go the opposite. So I went under here, so I'm going to go over, under, over, under, over, under. And so you'll be doing it the opposite. Whoops, it looks like I messed up there. But for the sake of demonstration purposes, I'm going to keep going. So you want to be really careful and make sure you're going over, under, and alternating. And if you have any experience tapestry weaving, this is pretty much just like tapestry weaving. You can use a fork or a comb to kind of bring your threads together and kind of pound it down a little tighter. And then you're going to attach it to this side. And then just go back across in the same manner. Any questions?
No questions so far. We have someone who mentioned that when they used to darn socks, they would use an old-fashioned light bulb as the support inside the sock there.
I've heard of that. I'd be afraid I'd break the light bulb. I'm sure I'd break it, but you can use a light bulb. You can use like a paperweight, or if you have a tennis ball, but being fuzzy, it might not be so nice. You could use like a rubber ball, or like a ball from a pool table or something. So, and then you just keep going. And if you've messed up your weave like I have, then you'd probably want to start over. One thing I was thinking about too is if you do know about tapestry weaving, especially if you had a big hole like this, instead of just doing the basic tabby weave, what if you did some kind of fancy tapestry weaving right here? You could do you could do some twining, you could do maybe the loops, you could do anything. What do you think of that, Claire?
Yeah, that could be fun. Yes. I mean, obviously you wouldn't want that on if it was like the sole of your sock you were darning, but if it's a cardigan or something else, yeah.
Yes, I was thinking more like a cardigan or a sweater, some type of a sweater or something. All right, so no question. This is really basic. Of course, this doesn't look great. I would rip this out and start over if I were working on this really, but this is the basic technique. And again, like something like this, I would really, this whole patch might take a half hour to an hour or more, because I would really be fussing over it to make it really perfect. So, don't judge it by the way it looks here, because if you take your time, you can get a really nice, this is a very secure mend, and it's a very strong mend, but it's not meant to be pretty. So it's not meant to look like you've never had a problem with this with a hole. This is a very visible mend, but it is a very strong and secure mend. Okay.
Question on that one.
Okay.
When you do the stabilizing stitch all the way or around the edge, are you going around the entire hole?
You if it needs stabilized around the entire hole, you can, or if it's just unraveling in certain areas, you can stabilize certain areas. So it's just really, every mend is going to be different. So if you tear your sweater, if you get a big hole in it, or somebody cuts a hole in it, but on one side there's a seam, maybe the seam is not going to unravel and you might just want to stabilize the other area or something. So depending on how it is, you know, any unstable areas you might want to stabilize. Does that help? Any other questions before we move on? So this is a method, sorry. This is a method that is basically just knitting a patch. And there are a couple ways you could do this. You could just knit a separate patch and then sew it on. Or you can knit the patch directly onto this item. So in a couple ways you can start, you could unravel any of these broken bits to try to get down to live stitches and put it on live stitches. Or, and again, I would want this patch to be larger than the hole because you want to be able to secure it to the edge where it's strong. And you don't want to try to secure it right to where the edge of the hole is because it'll pull loose. You want to move it in at least 1 or 2 rows so that you don't have it pulling loose later. So one way that's nice is you can just pick up stitches along the bottom of your piece. And right here, I can pick up, that's a live stitch. And so I could just go ahead and pick up that live stitch right there. And then pick this one up. And then go maybe 1 or 2 past where that hole is. Okay, any questions about picking up stitches? I think mine might have been crooked. I'm going to get down 1 more row. And knitted and crocheted fabric, they're both very forgiving. And if you do amend and it doesn't turn out as nice as you wanted, usually you can take it out and try it again. Okay, so pick up your stitches. Does that make sense? Anyone? You've ever picked up stitches before? And then,
Now, for this method, Darren, would you want to secure those live stitches with anything before you begin knitting the patch, or are you just free to let them hang out?
well, with this swatch, they're not unraveling. So I'm just going to go ahead and knit my patch. But again, if you're working with a slippery yarn or something that's unraveling, you don't want the hole to get larger. One thing you can do is I have all my needle felting tools. And one thing you could do is lightly just kind of needle felt all around the edge of that hole. And that's going to tangle up the fibers and lightly felt them together, and then they won't unravel. So that's another option. I always like to give lots and lots of options. So if you just lightly felt, and the patch is going to cover the edges. So if you got really aggressive and felted it too much, it's not going to be such a big deal. But if you feel like it's going to unravel, you should definitely secure it. But if you don't, then you can either just lightly felt it or kind of throw. And then you just start knitting, and then you'll knit in whatever pattern that you're trying to. So this is stockinette stitch. I'm just going to knit stockinette stitch. But if it was a cable, or if it was lace or seed stitch, you could go ahead and knit whatever stitch you want. This is just stockinette stitch, but if I wanted to add a cable to make the hole look like, you know, there was a hole here, but look, I made this great patch for it. You can do all kinds of things to make it look nice. Any questions?
So this is the method you'd recommend if you wanted to, say, if you had knit like a cabled sweater and you needed to recreate that pattern in this section.
Yeah, this is a good way to do that because even if you have the same yarn that you made the sweater out of, then it would be very, very invisible. And you would know the pattern for the cable and you could recreate that and it would actually be almost invisible. And then I'm just going to purl back. So just work, whatever stitch pattern is appropriate for your project.
Would you also want to do a blanket stitch or whip stitch around the edges of this hole since it's a little bit larger?
If you feel like you need to, you can. You can either do that or you can just lightly felt it. Or since this isn't going anywhere, I might not. I might just, leave it the way it is. Okay. What would you do, Claire? Would you go around it with blanket stitch or what would you think?
I might not do blanket stitch. I think I've seen it before where people do like a running stitch or a basting stitch to sort of secure the edges.
I would probably do that with would you do it with a smaller yarn or thread or would you use the same yarn?
Yeah, probably a little bit of smaller yarn.
Yeah. But for demonstration purposes, I thought this red yarn might be easy for people to see what I'm doing. Okay. So any questions about how I got this started or about what I'm doing to?
A couple questions about how you're going to secure that patch. Are you going to try to attach it to the fabric as you go, or will you do that afterwards?
I don't attach it as I go for this method. You certainly could. I just never have. A couple of reasons. I've been thinking about that. Why I've never done attach it as I go. Let me finish this. Because if you've really secured the edges, then it's probably fine to attach as you go. But if I didn't secure the edges, I might not want to. And then as you're sewing it down, if you're attaching as you're going, then the hole gets much smaller. So it's kind of hard to kind of manage keeping it shaped right. Sometimes it's hard to see what it's going on. What do you think, Claire? What would you do?
I think I've done it both ways, depending upon how large the hole is. And, if I think my row gauge is going to match up okay. I think then what I've done is used like a crochet hook to sort of pierce through the fabric and then catch the loop.
Or could you do it like this where you just pick up? I've done this before. I pick up one leg of the stitch and knit two together.
and then do it like a decrease. Exactly.
That's another good point though, when you talked about your gauge. If your gauge is not exactly right, and sometimes it's hard to get your gauge exactly right, then if you're attaching as you go, it might not lay flat. It might pull up or down a little bit. Do you think that would be a problem?
I think that's probably the thing to keep in mind if you want to attach it as you go. If you're the one that made the original item, I think it's probably pretty safe for you to try that. But say if you're working on like an heirloom piece or a store-bought item or something, I'd say it's probably easier to just knit the patch flat and attach it later at the sides.
But even if you made it, Claire, if you made something 10 years ago, do you think your gauge changes over time?
Well, that too, yes, depending upon if it's a recent knit or, you used to be a tight knitter and now you're in recovery.
Okay, so you continue knitting the patch. I'm not going to knit this whole patch until, and again, I would go past the hole. I might take it up to here or even up to here. And then I'm going to show you how to attach it. Oh, should I use that yarn? I didn't mean to. Let me pull this out. So I have this patch that I knitted to cover this other hole. Picked up the stitches, knitted the patch. I did not attach it as I go. I'm going to show you how I attach the top of it And this is kind of tedious, so get my stuff together. And if you really come up with a good yarn match, this can be quite invisible. So a couple of things you could do here. You could bind off, just bind off like normal and then sew it down. And that doesn't look so bad, but you're gonna have a definite ridge there where the seam is. You could put your top stitches, you could go back to the live stitches and put the live stitches on your on another double pointed needle. And then you could do Kitchener stitch to join it. But with Kitchener stitch, it's you're supposed to have the exact same number of stitches on each one. And if you're taking the patch out further than the hole, you're not going to have live stitches as many to match it. And I'm not sure if you just picked up stitches. Could you Kitchener stitch into picked up stitches, Claire?
Yeah, as long as those picked up stitches are live on an extra needle.
Okay, so you could do Kitchener, but what I'm going to do is show you another way. It's basically duplicate stitch. So I'm going to bring my needle through my loop. And you just want to make sure you're not twisting. So bring it through the loop, and you can take the loop off and then find the stitch up here and then just go under both legs like you're doing duplicate stitch. Pull that through. And then go back down. I should have left that on my needle. Whoopsie. And then go back down through the same one. You see right there, you get the same kind of a duplicate stitch. I think I skipped one. That's not looking the best. Let me try it again. So go through your loop. And then go under this stitch, just like duplicate stitch. Pick up both legs. And this is something I would probably leave it laid down flat so I can see exactly how it's shaping up as I'm going. And then bring it back down through that same loop. Through this loop. Pick up both legs. Does that make sense? Can you guys see what I'm doing?
For people who might not be familiar, could you just give a brief explanation of what Kitchener stitch is?
Yes. With Kitchener stitch, you do end up, you just have to visualize it. You end up with live stitch. It's typically you worked at the end of a toe of a sock. So think if you're knitting a tube and you want to close that tube off, you might have like 10 stitches on each needle, so 10 live stitches. And you do want to have the same number on both needles. And to close them up, there's a certain technique, and I always have to review it before I do it, where you sew those loops together and it makes a seamless close. That's why it's particularly nice at the end of a sock, because you don't have a seam rubbing against your toe. So Kitchener stitch is a great way to close up. You could do Kitchener stitch here, or you could do, you could just bind off and sew it down, or any way you think is best. And then for these side pieces, I would just kind of go down through the center of each stitch and kind of back up through the center of each one. almost like a back stitch, really. Well, how would you do this, Claire? What stitch would you use? No, I'd probably just use like a basting or a running stitch. That's what I'm gonna end up doing.
I might get fancy and try to do like mattress stitch, I guess.
Well, I guess you could. I would probably just do it like this, and then I might go over it a second time. But as you're working, as you're doing it, what you want to be looking at is you want to try to get this straight line here. So I've got this row. So I kind of started off in the wrong spot there. So you can see that's a good example of what, maybe I didn't. But what you want to do is you want to find a column of these stitches, and you want to make sure you're staying in a straight line. And then that way it'll give it a nice, neat look. And again, if you mess this up, you can always take it out and give it another go. You want to make sure you're not pulling it too tight. You don't want to distort or pucker your fabric, and you don't want to leave it too loose because you don't want loose, you don't want any holes or loose edges sticking out. Okay. And again, I did this super fat, well, I did this one patch earlier to prepare, but even still, I would have spent a lot more time sewing this side edge down if I was being really careful. So these, even though this looks really fast, if you want, see, it's not super nice. If you want to get a really nice, clean look, then it does take a long time. So these are not something you can sit down and do in 5 minutes. This patch alone and getting everything, getting that a really nice edge, and getting the edges done really nice. It's going to take a while. It's going to take a while. So, but this is just a basic, overview of how to do it, and then practice will make it more neat. Any questions about how I got it started or anything else? How are we doing?
Doing pretty good. We're about halfway through our time. Oh, someone wants to see the other side of the swatch. Good question.
The other side is never pretty. So what you would do to the other side is you're going to have all of these, because this is the hole, right? If you might not have a lot of loose ends like this, but when you're sewing this down, if you sew in every stitch, and I would go back up and give it a second. So I would sew it all the way down and then go back up and sew it again, going back up, just to make sure everything was really secure. And I would probably take my felting needles and just lightly felt. I love these felting needles. And if you've got a loose stitch, you can kind of redirect it to kind of make everything look nice. And that's going to help keep it from unraveling. And then you could either weave these ends in. I would probably recommend trying to weave them in. But if there's not enough to weave in, you can kind of unravel it a bit and then weave these in. Or if you feel like you've sewn it well enough, you can just go ahead and cut them off. Because that's the old, but you want to make sure that you've secured everything well enough so that it's not going to unravel. But again, finishing work, so finishing the back of it is also something that takes a while. Securing it, weaving in all these ends, making sure everything is good. You want to make sure you don't want it to unravel. So any questions about that?
You could try putting a product, I think it's called freight check, on the ends. I think that might leave a little bit of like a hard sort of bead at the end of the fiber. So maybe not so like great glue for a next to skin. Yeah.
It's kind of like glue. So it's gonna dry. It might be stiff and it might feel brittle, against your skin. So you might want to test that on a different area. But what you could also do, I didn't clean up this side at all. Once you get that sewn down, you could take a needle and thread and just kind of lightly sew this to your patch, not going to the front, but just picking up like one loop of your pearls, and do it with you can use invisible thread even to just kind of secure these down so that they don't unravel. And see, if you were sewing them down like that, excuse me, then that you could make it very secure. If you're using thread, you're not going to be adding any extra bulk. I'm always concerned with doing too much, because you're using yarn, you could really add layers and layers of bulk. It'll change the way your fabric hangs. It can change the way it looks from the front. Does it make sense? So don't be afraid to try like a needle and thread with some of these things to secure it. You don't have to use yarn for everything. Anything else, Claire? You can see from the front, it would look pretty good. If we spent time to make this look neat, and this was the same color yarn, it would be almost invisible, because you can see the stitches line right up as we picked up stitches. All right. Any questions before we move on? So this technique, this is my favorite technique, and it's also my least favorite, because it's very, very fussy and it's very tedious. But if I get in the right mood to do it, and I'm being very patient, you can get a very seamless join. The patch looks almost completely invisible. If you can get a good yarn that's matching the yarn that you have, then you can really get a great join with this. So what you want to do is you want to unravel it down to your live stitches. And I'm going to go one over, because it's just going to keep unraveling. So you want to just unravel it until it's pretty secure. I might even take that one out. Let me see. That one might be secure. So you want to unravel it. And again, you want to go a little past your hole. So then up here at the top, you want to get rid of all of these loose ends. Just kind of tuck them out of your way. And if you were working with a really, really slippery yarn, you might want to secure it first, but usually I haven't had a problem with that. So you just want to unravel it back to where you have live stitches and to where they're pretty secure. Okay. And then it's not a bad idea to go ahead and pick up, one or two past it to keep things kind of stable. Don't want to be unstable if you can avoid it, do we? Okay. And then any of these, so I've got these strings of yarn, you can go ahead and cut them, and we'll either weave those in later or just remove them. So what you want to end up with is pretty much like a nice rectangular shape. If you have a really big odd shaped hole, you can do this and kind of cover the odd shape, but it's going to be a little harder. So, practice on some like nice rectangular shapes first. And then if you have a piece that you want to repair that is kind of more odd shape, you can kind of clean it up and make it more rectangular, but that is a little bit harder to work with. So is everybody familiar with what duplicate stitch is? Do you want me to do a demonstration of that? Because we're going to use that a lot in this technique. So with duplicate stitch, what you want to do is you want to isolate one stitch. You want to isolate one stitch, and then we're going to duplicate it. We're going to sew over top of it. And you can use this as a color work technique or to repair by. So, and then you pick up the two legs of the stitch above it. And then you go back down the same hole where you started. And what you're going to see is this creates a knit stitch on top of another knit stitch. So it's duplicating that stitch. So right here is my red stitch that I duplicated. And then you want to come up in the stitch below. So I'm going to duplicate this one right here. So you want to actually come up in the stitch below it. So I'm going to come up in the stitch below it, right in the center, all the way up. And then go to the stitch above it, pick up the two legs of the stitch above it. And so the one you're duplicating, you're not actually sewing into. You're sewing into the one above it and below it. And that creates that leg. And then we go back down where we started, and that creates the other leg. Okay, so you see how that works? Now I've duplicated two stitches. Okay, pull these out real quick. I'll just cut it. So that's duplicate stitch. And you can go on and do that. And I could make a heart, I could write a word, you can do all kinds of things with duplicate. Very clever, very fun way to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start. So you want to find out where your fabric starts to look really secure. So I'm going to go along this edge right here. And I'm going to do duplicate stitch. Duplicate stitch. I'm going to go down and I'm going to come up in the stitch next to it. So I'm not going vertical, I'm going horizontal this time. I come up in the wrong place. Looks like I came up in the wrong place. Let's just keep going. That's, when you're trying to, these things are very tedious. You got to be very careful. So that's why you don't want to rush them. So you want to come up on the one very next to it. And now my fabric is starting to get in really bad shape, and it's not really going to hold a stitch very well. Okay. So you can see if this were the same color yarn, then those stitches would duplicate very nicely. And you don't want this to happen. You want to make sure you keep these live stitches on your needle. So then you're going to take this and you're going to lay it across here. I'm going to take my handy crochet hook. And this is almost like loom knitting. So I'm just going to pick up these stitches one at a time. Just like if you're picking up a dropped stitch. So just one at a time, feed them off the double pointed needle onto the crochet hook. And then just pick up your new yarn. All right. And then you want to secure it on this side, also by a duplicate stitch. And you want to take it out a little past, go maybe two columns past where the hole is. Wherever the fabric starts to look really strong and secure, you want to go into that strong and secure area. You don't want to go just work only into areas that are not so good. And then I'm going to go to the next row above. And this one is very, very tedious. And I spend a lot of time working on these type of repairs, especially if the stitches are very small. But if you're really super careful, you can get almost invisible results if you really want it to look invisible. So see, duplicate stitch back over to the hole. Any questions about what I'm doing, how I got here, why I'm making these decisions? Can you guys, are you able to see what I'm doing clearly?
What's the name of this technique?
I always called this Swiss darning. I'm not sure. I've seen other people call other things Swiss darning, so I'm not 100% sure, but that's the only thing I've ever heard it called. What do you think it's called, Claire? What have you heard it called?
I've just heard Swiss darning, but I think that's what I've heard from you. So
Probably. Okay, actually, I'll take that out. That was a mistake. If you make a mistake, it's easy to take it out. You're just going to stretch this across. You don't want to weave this in or attach it because you want to make sure you have plenty of slack because you don't want to have to pull it tight. So and as you work across, you're going to slide those back onto your double point because you don't want them ever kind of just hanging out without adequate supervision. So that's why this tends to get really kind of fussy. And as you're going, you do want to kind of try to manage your gauge. That one's going to be twisted. You don't want to let them super loose. You kind of manage the gauge manually. If you're working with the right size needle, you can go ahead and shape them around the needle. You can put them on that needle and just go ahead and shape them right on that needle. Now we've got 2 rows. Any questions? How do we feel about this way? Does anyone like it? Do we hate it?
I think everyone thinks you're magic.
You know, it does. The first time I saw this, I thought it was magic. But once you do it, you realize how knitted fabric really is kind of magic because it's so easily repaired and fixed. And if you're not a real experienced knitter and you learn how to do this method, it's very good because it helps you understand how knitted fabric, how the stitches kind of fit together to create the fabric. So I think it helps to add just like another level of understanding. Okay, I'm going to kind of cheat, just pretend I did duplicate stitches. I just want to show you going back across what it looks like. But a lot of the work is, I should have done like 2 or 3 duplicate stitches, gone up, do 2 or 3 back. But I'm not trying to waste your entire life doing this perfect. You take one from your double pointed needle on your crochet hook. You just kind of fix it that way. You do want to kind of mind your gauge. Making sure they're not too tight or too loose. And with this technique, it does really, I mean, it is knitted fabric, so it's going to move and hang and feel very similar to fabric that has not been repainted. Whereas a darn is not going to act the same as knitted fabric because it's woven fabric. I split my yarn, so I was going back to try to fix that, which I didn't really do it. Any questions? You guys going to try it? You have anything you need to repair?
I've seen a couple mentions of some socks that need repairing and a pair of slippers. So yes, those are definitely items that get a lot of wear. And I have a few pairs of socks to fix myself.
One clever thing with socks, though, is if you have socks that have a hole in them, like in the toe, you can go ahead and just cut that toe completely off the sock and knit a new toe. Have you ever done that, Claire?
I have not needed to do that, no.
Yeah, if things get
yes.
crazy and extreme, you can just cut the whole toe away and start a new one.
Yeah, I've got a couple mentions of some elbows on some sweaters. Someone's going to fix their hat, so.
And again, I'm kind of cheating here. I'm not really doing as much as I should. You should definitely go over 2 or maybe 3 rows to really secure that in nicely. I just want to make some progress here so you can see how this is going to look. And again, when I do this on, I've repaired a lot of store-bought sweaters for people this way. And I really have to be in a mood to do this. Like the cat has to be sleeping. Nobody can watch TV. Don't talk to me. Sometimes I have to put on the reading glasses and the regular glasses. Have a good light. And this one, you are joining it as you go. So you're joining it on the sides as you go. And then when you get to the top, again, you could bind it off and sew it down. You could do Kitchener stitch, or you could close it up with duplicate stitch like we did the other one. Any questions?
Someone wants to know if they can hire you for repairs. You've done such a good job.
But I'm not cheap, so I have fixed a lot of these for people, but it doesn't. And I do a better job, trust me. When I'm working on somebody's item, I really fuss over it. No more questions about that, though?
Oh, someone's mentioning they could use Tunisian knit stitch to do the repair as well. That would be another technique to try if you have that in your skill set.
I don't really know the Tunisian. I know the basic stitch, the Tunisian basic stitch. So I can't really speak to exactly how you would do that, but you certainly could do, you could just crochet it shut. Like you wouldn't even have to, that you could pick up stitches and then crochet it. And then, you're just gonna have a visible patch. You could do any number of things. So. All right, so for the crocheters, are there any crocheters out there?
I think we've got a couple here today.
All right, so for a crochet, I've fixed a lot of granny square blankets over the years. And the problem is people used to, I don't know if people still do this, but when they change colors, they would just tie them in knots, and then they would trim their knots down really close so you couldn't see them. And they really do unravel over time. And it always breaks my heart to see somebody, have an Afghan that was made by their grandmother or a family heirloom that is just unraveling like that. And it can be repaired, and I've repaired a lot of them. But when you're making your items, instead of just tying a knot, you want to make sure you're weaving in your ends. You want to save about 4 to 5 inches. And crochet stitches are 3-dimensional, and you can really hide your ends inside the stitch. So that's one thing I've noticed. But so I'm going to, and a lot of times there'll still be original yarn from the piece still attached to it. So if you have an old blanket, an old Afghan that somebody made, and there are still strands of yarn like this, sometimes you can just kind of harvest them and use them for the repair, and it makes it much more invisible. So what I'm going to do is, this is half double crochet, so I'm just going to chain 2 to start my half double. And this is a granny square, so I'm just going to work in the granny stitch. Just look at your piece and see. And I'm running out of yarn there, so I'm going to go ahead and see. If I had the exact same yarn, I would have cut that off and started with a fresh piece. But if this were like a 50-year-old blanket that my great-grandmother made, I would want to try to conserve as much yarn as possible, because it'll make the hole more invisible. So that's why I did it that way. But if it were something I just made and I still had the yarn, I would definitely have cut that and started a new one. So. So you just want to work it across, fill all the spaces that you can, and then just cut that. And a lot of the darning work I do with crochet, I actually do a lot of it with just the darning needle. So I'm going to tuck these ends in the back and I would sew them in, but I have to attach it up here. So I'm just going to take my darning needle kind of through these loops. And then attach it here. And bring it back up kind of through these loops. You want to make sure you're catching, if you see any loose ends that you missed, make sure you're catching any of those. And it might not look exactly like the original stitches, but it's going to look pretty close. Kind of make sure there are no loose ends sticking out. And then when I weave in my ends, all you have to do is to just go under and see how it's a three-dimensional stitch. You can go inside that stitch and you're not really going to see it from the front or the back. You do want to keep your thread on your needle. That's a very key point. And you want to try to weave it in like 2 inches one direction, maybe go back 2 inches another direction. Just kind of burying that in the middle. And then cut it off flush with your fabric and kind of massage it out. You want to make sure you're not pulling it too tight. That looks pretty good. You would never really notice that, right? I mean, if you were looking hard for it, you'd see it, but you know, if it's folded up on your couch, it's stable. It's not gonna, you can still use the blanket. It's gonna be very nice. And then if you find any like funny edges like that, after you're finished, you can go ahead and secure those down with the ends of your other pieces of yarn. So you want to make sure you're weaving in all of these ends. So I had a funny piece in the front, so I'm going to take this back to the front. See if I can kind of get back over to where that funny piece was. And just kind of tighten that up. Kind of help fix it. And that one can just be cut off because that one's just So any questions about the crochet? So you want to make sure you're identifying which crochet stitch it is and try to find as close a match of yarn as possible. Any questions at all? And a lot of
we're coming up on the end of class, so if anybody has to run, I just want to remind them that this class was recorded and it'll be posted on the Michael's YouTube channel in about 24 hours. So you can come back and watch whichever section as many times as you need to.
Okay, we're pretty much done. And again, here, sometimes where I'll use my felting needles, if I've got a loose piece, it's kind of, sometimes it's scary to cut these loose ones. You can just kind of felt them into line with your felting needle. Lightly though, you don't want to overwork it, easily overwork it, and you don't want it to look bad on the back. So you don't want to over felt it, make it super fuzzy on the back. So that's pretty much it for class. That end, I would just have to weave that in properly like I did my other ends. If you have any questions going forward about any of the stuff we covered today, feel free to contact me on social media. You can find me on Instagram. Maybe Claire will put my Instagram name in the chat. It's Mr. Woolly Bear. It's spelled out M-I-S-T-E-R, Woolly Bear. Just send me a direct message, or if you want to find me on Facebook, it's just my name spelled out, Darren Morris. Just send it to my name, send me a direct message. I can usually answer things pretty quick. So I know we cover this really fast, and you'll probably, once you start doing it, you'll have questions. So, all right, anything quickly before we go, Claire?
We do have some rapid fire questions here. Does needle felting do anything to acrylic yarn?
Yes, you can completely needle felt with acrylic yarn you can make. We just had the class, was it last week?
I think week before last.
Week before last. So you can make complete sculptures out of acrylic yarn with needle felting, not wet felting, but needle felting. People will tell you no, but yes, the answer is yes.
Someone wants to know what the ribbon felting box is called. I'm not. Are they talking about maybe the felting mat underneath there?
This one, this is just like it's a felting brush, and it's by Clover. I don't know if this is what. It's just a felting mat. I call it a brush, but I think they call it a mat. It's by Clover. And it's nice to have that to kind of put stuff on as you're working. I like it.
And how would you go ahead about with washing items that have been repaired? Do they need to be more delicate?
Any handmade items that I want to keep nice, that I would take time to repair, I hand wash, lay flat to dry, because that's the most gentle. So if it's something that you've taken the time to repair, or taken the time to make, I always lay flat, hand wash, lay flat to dry. I never put handmade things in the machine. Even if this says you can, they're not going to hold up as well. You want these things to last.
And the last one was, what about if the item is sort of already felted before you start the repair?
And that's fine too. If it's already felted and pretty much like the bottom of socks are going to be, by the time you've worn a hole in them, the fabric's pretty much felted together from the friction and the moisture from your feet. So you can just go ahead and do any of these techniques. You could do the darning, you could do a knitted patch, or you could do, even if it's felted, you'll probably still be able to see the stitches. So you just have to pick the one that you think is going to look the best or serve best for your purposes. Yeah.
All right, that's all we have time for today.
All right, so if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. And these things do take a lot of practice. So before you start mending stuff, practice on some swatches. Don't practice on like your favorite sweater or your grandmother's antique Afghan. Practice on something else first and then go for it. But it just does take lots of practice. So, all right, thanks for coming to class. Have a great night. Happy holidays.